Hello there my friends, and welcome back to another episode of TA with MK. My name is MK, and in today's learning tutorial video, we are going to discuss how to nail your entry as it pertains to trading an altcoin. We're going to give a few different examples on a few different time frames, kind of working your way out on a higher time frame idea, and then zooming into some of the lower time frames and looking for patterns or ideas that can help you, enter these coins. And if that sounds interesting to you, please, as always, remember to like and subscribe, and let's go. It's TA with MK. It's TA with MK. Gents and ladies, no time to waste. Don't be afraid, it's time to trade. Let's start your brains like high-speed trains. Storm these games like hurricanes. It's time to save this herd this days. Put on your cape and learn the phrase. It's TA with MK. It's TA with MK. Now, the first thing that I feel is fairly important to bring up before we jump into our first example in today's video is understand that when it comes to nailing your entry on these coins, it really does matter what type of trade you're making. And what I mean by that, are you looking to accumulate something for a mid to maybe long-term hold, in which case, in that case, you should be on very, very high time frames, things like weekly, definitely not anything more zoomed in than a daily. And in that case, nailing your entry isn't as important as it would be in a short-term trade. So we're going to kind of cover both ideas just so we cover our basis, but just understand that it's a completely different skill set to trade a coin, over the course of a few hours to maybe a day versus, accumulating a coin for maybe the next 1 to 2 years. With that out of the way, we're going to start on the daily chart of Mana, which is Decentraland. It's a metaverse gaming coin, and we're going to quickly explain kind of how you would look to trade this coin or potentially invest in this coin for more of a mid to potentially long-term hold, which is different, of course, than when we zoom in. The first thing you want to do, and I will leave a link in the description to a video that I've put out that kind of explains this better, but you want to find all of your major support and resistance areas, at least, within a certain percentage of where you're looking to trade the coin. It doesn't hurt to just go ahead and do them all. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly add those to the chart. But again, if you're new to finding support and resistance or how to chart these things, see that link in the description and it'll be a major help. Okie doke, we've went ahead and added a couple of trend lines and some, horizontal lines of support and resistance. And let me just briefly explain why I've marked these and kind of why I find them to be significant. So first off, the orange lines here are just the color that I choose to use for daily, which is the time frame I'm on, of horizontal support and resistance, just key areas where price action has interacted with. And as you can see clearly, there was this rally here and there was a major rejection there. It acted as major support here after a big downfall, led to a good sized bounce. After that area was lost, you can see it got flipped as resistance here. So obviously that's a key area of support and resistance throughout Mana's, at least multi-year history. This next level down, big resistance here, big resistance all in here before dropping down, and even was resistance back here, so clearly another area, and so on. So each of these areas that I've marked are just areas of horizontal support and resistance where price action has interacted on the daily time frame on multiple occasions. Next, we've got a couple of major trend lines on the daily time frame. For example, back here between April and May, you kind of had this falling wedge that price action was working inside of after it had a major pump, big retrace, multi-month retrace, before it finally broke out. Now, there's definitely ways you can zoom in, and we'll talk about this on some lower time frames in a bit, where you could have looked to nail that entry there. But as far as more of a mid to long-term hold, the thing you want to see whenever you're looking for a major, like in this case, a daily trend change, is whenever you break out of something like a falling wedge, you want to look to whatever was the last high inside the wedge, which would be this rejection here. In fact, if I clear this up, it'll be a little easier to see. So this last rejection right here would be the last high inside the wedge, right? Which is this horizontal line of resistance. Well, you would have had to be patient and wait, several months, but you can see it got rejected here. You might have been waiting for the breakout there. You didn't get it. Would have actually been a good time to short it. You had another chance for another little lower time frame falling wedge, broke out, but again, really it wasn't until it flipped the last high inside of this, major pattern before you saw, this explosive move to the upside. Now, granted, this was the bull market. A lot of FOMO came in. You know, you're not going to see these kind of pumps normally, especially in the middle of a bear market or maybe the beginning of a bull market, which is kind of what we're looking like we could potentially be in now. But still, that being said, you never know when you enter a coin exactly what it's going to turn into. But that would have been the entry based on, you know, this falling wedge breakout on the daily that you'd have been looking for. So also, if we take this trend line, we can go from here and kind of draw a trend line going across here, kind of shorten this one up, zoom in a little bit, and now you can see that you had a huge symmetrical triangle, which basically was dating back. The beginning of it was basically February of 2021, and you didn't get a breakout clear until October, which was, you know, basically 8-9 months later. You get this breakout, and of course, again, that explosive move. But where you would have been looking to enter this is you'd have been looking for the break of this major triangle first on these higher time frames, and at that point you could zoom in, which we'll talk about in a minute, and look for lower time frame entries. Same thing on this end over here. You kind of have this large falling wedge. This is a more recent price action, but you have this large falling wedge here. Then you had the breakout here. That would have been a good time to enter. But at this point, we're going to zoom in a second and kind of get some entry ideas if you were looking to trade mana right now, kind of more of a short term. But as far as mid to long term, you know, really you want to look for major areas of support. In this case, clearly this area back here where it bounced and it became the low before this explosive move that ensued a few months later. You know, most recently we were at that area between basically November of the end of last year clear until January, mid-January of this year. So you would have had, you know, a few months there that you could have accumulated at a major area of support. Now again, of course, you would DCA in, dollar cost average, you know, just in case it does decide to visit lower prices. But as far as if you believe in a project and you're looking to trade it more mid to long term, it really is just as simple as accumulating at these major areas of support and then maybe adding to your bag when you see a breakout on, you know, a major time frame like the daily. Okay, so that all sounds easy enough, but what if you were tracking this coin on the daily time frame, seeing this giant symmetrical triangle that looks like it's getting to the end of the pattern, potentially a breakout's on the way? How would you zoom in and look for an entry? Well, for me, where I would start would be something like the 1 hour time frame. You have to bear with me for a second as we're gonna have to zoom back and find that price action. Okay, so now as we've zoomed into the 1 hour time frame for mana, there's a few things I've noted on the chart. First, we have this little lower time frame kind of rising channel that price action was, you know, working within. But you can see as it gets towards the end of this rising channel, which is also towards the, you know, latter part of that large daily symmetrical triangle, you can see volume began, it was really low. I'd have to zoom in for you to see it, but it was really low, and suddenly you started seeing a large uptick in volume. Now, understand that this is a pattern that has a 68% chance of breaking to the downside at some point. However, if it breaks, you know, the opposite of that, anytime you see a pattern break to the opposite direction that statistically it's supposed to, one thing that I've learned in trading is that can lead to a parabolic move, potentially the opposite direction, right? In this case, you kind of had this double bottom leading up into the price action, little bit of volume at that point that led into that, then it compressed itself within this little range, volume started to come in, and then this yellow horizontal line that I have on the chart is actually where the daily 200 simple moving average was sitting at that point in time. Now, another idea to always keep in your back pocket, or at least something to understand, is if you want a short-term trade to turn into a mid-term or potentially a long-term trade, you know, more of a sustained upside move or bullish idea, it's always nice to see the coin move above the 200 simple on the daily. In fact, quite often it will lead to a big change in trend, right? Anytime that the 200 is acting as resistance, you know, typically in a downtrend, just by the very nature being below that, and then being above that, of course, can often mean beginning of a large uptrend. So when you had that breakout on the 1 hour time frame, let's just say you missed it, but clearly you can see things have changed because volume has come in. You just broke to the upside of a pattern that you shouldn't, you know, shouldn't break to the upside statistically, and you're breaking out of this large daily symmetrical triangle, right? So what would you do now to try to get, you know, to try to have yourself be part of what ended up being this crazy pump? one other thing I want to quickly add before we zoom in is it's important to understand that your best entry, or your safest entry I should say, is always going to be the retest. Now the problem is, if a coin becomes bullish, is you won't always get the retest. What do I mean by a retest? Well, when you had this trend line that was acting as resistance on 1, 2, 3, 4 occasions, right, and it broke out of it on the daily with volume, a tremendous amount in this case, your best entry would have been some sort of a pullback where it retested, you know, maybe this 200 simple moving average and the top side of that trend line, you know, as support. That would have been number one best entry. However, you have to understand and learn to adapt on the fly that if something is bullish, or the market's bullish, or the coin you're trying to trade or enter is bullish, you may not always get option one. So it's good to have plan A, plan B, and plan C. So plan A, safest entry, would have been a retest. And so you would have left some capital on the side, maybe set an alert there and prepared in case that happened. But in this case, you didn't get it. So now, how do we enter this coin kind of on the fly? So we're on the 5-minute time frame for Mana now, and I've actually opened up a different chart on a different site just so we can kind of do a side-by-side. You can see kind of what the daily was doing here. And then if we're on this 5-minute chart, you can see that, so zoomed out, this is the same trend line here that it was breaking out of here. And on the 5-minute chart, you can see, and actually you'd see even more if it was on the 1-minute chart, but you can see there was a bunch of different falling wedges that continued to form, or some people call them bullish pennants, but you had quite a few different of these form that would have been ideas for entry, right? Because typically if a coin is going to go, you know, parabolic or continue to have some upside and you're quote unquote trying to chase the coin, on these lower time frames you will notice that it'll continue to form these little falling wedges, and then you can look for breakouts for entry. Now of course, again, you DCA in, you wouldn't want to go all in one spot and still have a plan that maybe price action would eventually come back down here. But if it doesn't, you know, you could have entered on this breakout, especially once it broke above this high here, this retest. So you would have had this breakout entry, you'd have had this retest where it flipped this wedge high. Same thing here, you have this wedge high. You could have entered the breakout or the retest right here. Again, you know, rinse and repeat. You kind of had this wedge, here's the high. Could have entered the breakout here, or could have waited till the breakout of this wedge and the retest of there. You know, this is basically the definition of an uptrend, right, on the 5-minute time frame. And at that point, you could just keep trading the coin. Eventually, you had this little rising channel that it broke to the upside, and then volume continued to pick up. And the nice thing is maybe you weren't able to go all in. You may have saved a, you know, large amount of your capital, or you should have, for this potential retest. But at least on these lower time frames, you can get yourself some exposure to the coin, maybe 25%, or maybe 15% down here, another 15% here, maybe another 15% here, or something like that. And now you're almost 50% into the coin, and then you can just let it ride. So that's kind of an example of zooming in to find entry on a coin if it starts to get away from you. Okay, so for example 2, we're just going to use the same coin. That's all we're going to focus on in today's video, is just Mana. In an update video to kind of this series on how to nail your entry, we'll use a different coin or coins, but this just kind of seems like a good one where we have something similar happening with price that, you know, happened back here in 2021. And that is, it's a different pattern, but we have a breakout on a major time frame pattern, this falling wedge that it, you know, worked inside of basically from May of 2022, clear until it broke out again with, you know, huge upticks in volume right around January the 23rd, right? And we're going to zoom in and talk about a few of the potential entries that you could make in real time right now, or, you know, if you were looking to trade Mana right now, what would be the things you'd be looking for? How could you enter the coin? And so forth. So the first thing that I'm seeing is that on the daily, right, we've broken above, retested on a couple occasions, the 200 simple. Again, that's what happened back here, right? Right as we got to the end of the major pattern, we were also breaking above the 200, so it just kind of ticked more than one box as far as bullish ideas. Break of a major trend line, huge amounts of volume, above the 200, check, check, check. And then over here, this one, you had a break above this. There was a ton of volume. You know, on the daily, it wasn't as much as you saw back here, of course, during the bull market, but it was the first big spike in volume in quite some time. And then you saw another spike in volume as we, you know, broke above the 200 simple. Volume has obviously increased substantially from what it had done basically all of 2022, or at least from May on, for spring and summer. So, the coin is trying to do something different. So we've checked 2 boxes, break of a major trend line on a daily. Now we're above the 200 simple. What would be a lower time frame idea that we'd be looking for? Okay, so now this is the 4-hour time frame for Mana. This is actually real time. This is the current price, our price action for Mana. Now again, over here on the Binance chart, this is the daily. So what we're looking at here is basically this zoomed in on the 4-hour chart. We're starting on the 4-hour chart in this case to try to find some bullish ideas before we zoom into lower time frames to nail entries. Now, 4-hour time frame ideas, we've missed one already, but basically you kind of had this symmetrical triangle here. The price action was consolidating within for a few days. It broke out with a bit of volume right here, right? So option A there would be a retest, which we just recently got. That's one spot you could DCA into the trade. You can kind of see that where we last got rejected has now kind of turned into a rising channel. Now keep in mind, this is a pattern that has a 68% chance of breaking to the downside. So statistically, the odds of this breaking down are higher than up. However, when a coin is bullish or the market's bullish, you'll often see things break the opposite direction that they should. So that's still something we're open-minded to. Now again, we haven't talked about stop losses in this video, and I will leave a link in the description to a video that I put out about stop losses. But you should always use a stop loss in a trade, and what I would consider the invalidation for anything to do with this 4-hour time frame would be a breakdown of this lower trend line of the rising channel, right? If we break down and we lose that trend line, well, then we're most likely headed back down here somewhere, right? Maybe even lower. And at that point, it invalidates any short-term bullish ideas, which is what we're looking for. So let's just say you missed this retest, but you're zooming in, kind of looking for your next entry ideas. To do that, we're going to go up here. We're going to click actually on the 15-minute time frame, see what kind of patterns we can find. Okay, so we can see that price action right now is in a bit of a falling wedge. So we can go ahead and mark that. What we'd be looking for in this case would be a breakout of the falling wedge, and again, like we talked about earlier, for it to flip the last high inside the wedge, which would be here. This would kind of validate the trend changing from a downtrend in the short term to an uptrend. That would be one entry option. Another, or an even safer bet, would be for it to flip the last, where this wedge began, so something like this right here would be option number 2. Option number 3 would be a double bottom retest of kind of the last high that it took out. So you kind of had this last little bit of a triangle that it was consolidating in, which ended up being the break and retest of these highs back here, right? This is all short time frame ideas. This is kind of like a little bit of a rounded bottom consolidation on lower time frames. It was able to break out, flip that as support, and lo and behold, where did this last wedge bounce? That same area. So you can kind of see that it's maintaining its uptrend even on the lower time frames right now. So if you could get a breakout of this, enter here a little bit, a break of this last high over here would be another bullish option. And each time you enter these coins on these lower time frames, if it's a short-term trade, you just put your stop loss somewhere back, whatever you're comfortable with, back below the last high it took out. Because if it loses that, then that there's potential that the coin's trying to start a different trend. So now this concept is probably something I should put an entire video out, and actually I do plan to in the near future. But it's the idea that you're going to find areas on any time frame, and especially lower time frames, that are kind of no trade areas or areas to look out for traps. Now you can see here on this price action leading into kind of where we are now, you had this whole little falling wedge, or this area that price was consolidating. It had a wick down here, but that ended up being the low. It consolidated. Essentially, this was a descending triangle, which is a bearish pattern. However, it was happening after an upside move, so probably about a 50-50 that it could have broke to the upside, but it broke to the downside, right? And when it broke to the downside, it was only in this area that was this little fake out back here very briefly before it lost it and had a more significant move to the downside, right? And again, as it moved up, lo and behold, that same little area or zone, which is this whole area in here, price action got rejected there again. And then you had another bit of a falling wedge, right? Which broke out, flipped to support, but you wouldn't have wanted to enter this until it got back above this kind of no man's land, right? Well, it briefly did, however, it got rejected, and then you had this little wedge, right? Now I bring all that up just to say that where we're currently at is important, because price action broke back up and flipped right here, this whole kind of area that's been, you know, no man's land, right, as support. And it retested it after it had this falling wedge right here. Now volume is declining a little bit on the lower time frames, but you can still see clearly we have volume coming in. There's more volume here than there was back here. Still a pretty good amount of volume. And the key here is that price action's attempting to flip what was previously kind of a fake out wiki area as potential support. Biggest thing I want you to take from that as we finish up this video is it doesn't matter what time frame you're on, you want to find as much confluence as you can as to support your idea, whether that's bullish or bearish. In this case, we're looking for, you know, spot or potentially leverage long ideas, right? And what I'm saying here is that this area, or this little zone that I just referred to as kind of a no trade area, or in this case a very wiki fake out area where price action hasn't spent much time, right? That this last bounce is significant if this wedge were to break, we were to take out the last high inside the wedge, and, you know, potentially start trending upwards, because it means the last bounce down here was flipping an area that had kind of been, you know, very, very bearish, you know, in this case short term, of course, because it's lower time frame. But again, it would just add to the idea that upside continuation is more than likely, right? Again, if it were to come back down here, retest it again, that'd be fine as well. You might get a little double bottom like you see back here before a breakout, like you see right here before a breakout. Very, very common thing to see on lower time frames is, you know, a double bottom or a retest, a second retest of an area that it's trying to flip as support. And, you know, that just adds, again, to your bullish ideas. And then if you flip this high, that could, again, be your entry and so on. Ultimately, you'd be looking for a flip of this for some more upside continuation, right? And one final thought I'll leave you with in today's training video, just remember that there's many, many, many ideas out there on how to enter coins, how to quote-unquote nail your entry. These are just a few examples, some personal things that I use or ideas that I use. Doesn't mean that they're the end-all be-all. There's other ways out there, and we'll discuss some of those, you know, other ideas in future videos. On your way out, if you can do me a huge favor if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.
It's T-A